Blessings on this warm summer evening. As you know, myself and Venerable Yanadipo, Venerable Kemarangsi went to Thailand and India recently. I haven't been to India for about 16 years. Went quite a few times when I lived in Thailand. Venerable Yanadipo hadn't been there before. So it was a good opportunity to take him to India to see where the Buddha was enlightened, where he lived, because he's going to build a chedi as an offering to the Buddha Puja this year. So it seemed an appropriate journey to make. So going to India helped to show a few things. One was that India is developing very fast economically, changing quite quickly, like many countries in the world now. The part of India where the Buddhist holy sites is northeast India, Bihar state. It's one of the poorer parts of India. And yet there's lots of people there. But even this poorer area, they're now building lots of roads and buildings everywhere. There's an airport at Bodh Gaya where the Bodhi tree is. You can fly straight there. And the visual signs of poverty are a little bit less than they used to be, I think. India is a place like that. There are people with great wealth in India, and also people experiencing great poverty, and there's a lot of people there. I think something like 2,000 million, 2 billion people. So lots of people. Lots of people means lots of viruses. So I brought a souvenir back. I have a cough. But going to meditate and chant at the Bodhi tree, which marks this the place where the Buddha was enlightened. For me, always brings up, the first reflection is always thinking about the Buddha and his life, how he was born as a prince, they say, son of one of the ruling families of that part of India. Well, actually from slightly north of where the Bodhi tree is. But born into great wealth and power, and had everything all the human comforts and education and comforts and things that people could have in those days. And yet he left it all behind to go and pursue the holy life, to go out in the forest, shaved his head, put on the robes of a monk, lived in the forest very simply. They call that the great renunciation. partly because it's the Buddha, or the Buddha to be, the Bodhisattva, making that sacrifice, that effort to leave the pleasure, the comfort of the whole, the palace and the life he was brought up in. And this was a great cause on his path to becoming the Buddha. But for anyone to leave great wealth and comfort and opportunity behind to pursue a life of more or less poverty, living in the forest, the uncertainties of alms mendicant, not sure where the next meal will come from, medical help uncertain, accommodation, all the basics of life just uncertain, because that's the life of a bhikkhu, a monk. And that's a great renunciation in itself for anyone. And after his 6 years of what we call ascetic practices, pushing himself, physically particularly, but also mentally, because to push yourself physically actually requires a lot of mental effort as well. Finally, realizing that he didn't, that wasn't the way to go to gain true liberation, which is what he was seeking, nibbana. Even though many people believed it was the way at the time, he had to break through that set of beliefs that people had. And in the end, he had to find his own way, because that's the nature of the Bodhisattva. He's self-taught, ultimately. So he had to leave his teachers behind and leave the normal views about meditation and Dhamma practice in those days behind and pursue a new direction. But ultimately he was successful under the Bodhi tree. On the night of Visakha, the full moon in May, when he became enlightened, or we say fully awakened. So when you go to that tree, these kind of thoughts come up. Oh, the Buddha, born into wealth, comfort, but leaving it behind to just come and live in the forest, simply wearing simple robes, eating very simple food, sharing the food of probably just the villagers, and with the villagers being, a lot of them being fairly poor, food is quite simple. But not complaining, not bothering, that wasn't his goal. His goal was no longer to achieve wealth and comfort. It was to develop wisdom, understanding, free his mind from the causes of suffering. So he wasn't bothered about the kind of food he had, as long as he had enough to get by. He knew how to fast. He knew how to be patient with the conditions. He could live simply in the forest. And if you go to the Bodhi tree, still I imagine it's much the same as when the Buddha was there, although now they built a town up around that area. I imagine in the early days it was a village at most. But you sit under a tree or near that tree, at night you get eaten alive by mosquitoes. So things like that are just normal for a monk living in the forest, the jungle, bitten by mosquitoes, all kinds of bugs, ants on the ground. The ground is hard, the ground is cold in the winter. The air at night is very cold. Just as a monk, you just have your robes. So it makes you think of the Buddha, his sacrifice in order to attain awakening, just the physical comfort that he sacrificed, and then the great effort he put forth to train his mind. So going to India brings up these kind of reflections, makes it seem perhaps just slightly more real, which is maybe why the Buddha said it. It's something that if you can, as a disciple of the Buddha, will go to where the Buddha was enlightened as a pilgrimage. It's one thing he did encourage to help strengthen your faith, because people's faith rises and falls, waxes and wanes. Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it disappears. But if you go to India, it's just one cause. Maybe gives you a good memory and gives you some understanding, better understanding of the life of the Buddha and how he practiced. There's many things you pick up as you're there. So like just the spiritual nature of the culture, even though it's becoming perhaps more materialistic, like everywhere in the world. People have a great spiritual faith. Obviously most people are not Buddhists, but they have faith in something. Different kinds of religious belief and practice. That becomes clear, and many Hindus, what we would call Hindus, still go to the Buddhist shrines like Bodh Gaya, the Bodhi tree, or other holy places that are important in the life of the Buddha. They go there and worship as well, and they feel it's important for them as well. Also the universal appeal of the Buddha's teachings you see at the Bodhi tree, because people come from all over the world, literally. Every corner of the globe to worship, meditate, circumambulate, give Dhamma teachings, listen to Dhamma teachings, make offerings. Mainly the offerings of flowers, and also robes and robe cloth, candles, lots of candles and oil lamps offered in honour and memory of the Buddha. People come from all directions. That's how when in the day of the Buddha they didn't say all over the world, they say from the 4 directions, because that's the truth, isn't it? When people come to one spot, they're coming from different directions, and the 4 main directions, north, south, east, west. So you see that there's something universal in the appeal of the Dhamma that the Buddha taught, because it's truth. And everybody who goes there anyway is seeing the value of truth. The truth that can liberate us from the real cause of suffering, which is the opposite of truth, is delusion, ignorance, misunderstanding, false ideas, wrong ideas, false beliefs and views that cause us to do things that cause us more suffering. And truth cuts through all of that. And so when people ask, they say, well, what did the Buddha awaken to or become enlightened to when he was under the Bodhi tree? Well, it's the truth, and he described that as the 4 noble truths. Very, very clear teaching, suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path that leads to the end of suffering. Nowadays everybody sees suffering as to be overcome by getting more wealth, making the world better on the outside. But you don't hear much about developing insight into the truth on the inside, inside of people's hearts and minds. And that's what the Buddha was focused more on. He'd already been in a lifestyle of comfort, material success, but he realised that's that ultimately won't take him beyond suffering. He could see it's also full of danger. You see, when you contemplate life, he always used to say, contemplate the benefit and the danger of things, the good side and the bad. So it's not to say having wealth, there's no good side to it. It can bring you, like we say, comfort, convenience. If you're ill and you've got the money to pay for the doctor, well, that's good. It's not all wrong or bad, but it's limited because the pursuit of wealth, comfort, happiness, material happiness, or sense pleasure, we say, alone cannot take you beyond suffering, doesn't give you the wisdom to go beyond suffering, abandon the causes of suffering, doesn't give you the wisdom to abandon ignorance from your mind, and in fact tends to increase ignorance because we get hooked on the pleasures and the comforts of the world. That's why the world economy does so well, it keeps growing, because we keep wanting to buy more stuff, get more things. We assume that the more we have, the happier we'll be. But the Buddha said, no, that doesn't work, because he's already lived that way. And then he left the palace and he'd had experience going around the town. So he'd seen both wealth and poverty, the rich, the poor, the healthy, the sick, the young, the old, the living and the dead. He sort of experienced all that enough to realize just pursuing material wealth alone won't bring us true peace and happiness. That's another wrong way of thinking, or another cause for suffering in itself, because we become discontent, always trying to get more wealth, get the next product, the next fashion item, the next thing that you think will make you feel good. Well, it may bring you some pleasure temporarily, but then that pleasure fades and you're left with a mind that's hungry for more. And you keep feeding that desire, it gets stronger. It becomes like a habit. So as humans, as you see when you meditate, one of your biggest problems is you keep thinking about what you want from life. I want more, I want this, I want that. You can't sit still and you can't find stillness because your mind keeps wanting more. And the whole world revolves around that truth. It's the truth of craving. Because we don't see the truth, we crave and attach and want and cling to things all the time. So the Buddha had seen that, and he left the palace to go and train to find something superior or higher or more peaceful, more satisfying. So that's why he went out into the forest to learn meditation. But his first steps were a little, because of the teachers of the day, they believed, well, you have to really push yourself. He went out, he learned meditation, he learned to quieten his mind, still his mind, and attain jhana very quickly. We would say because of his past lives, he's already practiced meditation, so he learned to meditate and become very skilled in that quickly. But still not enlightened, he could still see his mind was not completely at ease. The attachments that lead to more birth, more suffering still there. So then he went on to push himself further. He said, well, what I've done so far is not enough. So if you go to the Bodhi tree, well, then you also can take a trip out to the hills where they say the Buddha practiced the ascetic practices for 6 years with his friends, the ascetics. And he pushed himself physically and mentally to his limit, and he could do it better than anyone else. Fast, and reducing his food down from sort of normal, as a layman, 3 meals a day or even more, including snacks. Reduce down 2 meals, 1 meal, and then reduce the amount of mouthfuls he could take. down to just taking a mouthful or a handful of rice, and then reducing that down to, in the end, he was just taking one grain of rice a day or one grain of rice a week, the tiniest amount of nutrition. So he got so skinny, he's just weak, physically weak, and his mind was under pressure all the time because he pushed himself so far. And he pushed himself in other ways, like going without sleep, not moving, sitting without moving, all kinds of extreme practices that required great determination, patience, effort, but didn't result in enlightenment, which is the important point. If you go into the cave they say that the Buddha lived in, it's a tiny little cave, very hot, stuffy little cave. And you can imagine the Buddha in there, pushing himself. He has a certain pleasure from his jhana, that's why he could do it. You can't just push yourself, endure in that way, unless you already have some level of concentration and the peace and the stillness of mind that brings some inner happiness with it. He used that. And then he would, because of his, you might say, wrong view or lack of understanding, because he didn't yet have a good teacher, or a teacher that was fully enlightened, he pushed on further. So he used his jhana and then just pushed himself to the point where he's so emaciated, they say, his chest was sort of protruding out, you could see all the bones, and you could stick your finger in his stomach and you'd hit his backbone. There's nothing, no flesh, no fat, nothing left on his body, and he's probably very weak, and also that makes it hard to even concentrate the mind. So he did all that, but then finally he realized this is not working. And that even is a kind of wisdom, isn't it? When you realize something you tried or held dearly as, oh, this is the right way, this is the right thing to do, finally you realize it's not. That's a sign of a wise person, I'd say, or a bodhisattva, is where they realize this is the wrong way, and so they start looking for a new way of practice, a new approach, a new attitude. And that led the Buddha to come down from the mountain where he was in the cave back to the river near where the Bodhi tree is, which you can go and see. And where he was offered milk rice in the morning, which is nothing unusual in India, be offered milk rice in the morning, but for the Buddha, who had been fasting and pushing himself for so many years, I imagine a nice bowl of milk rice from the Lady Sujata would have been very welcome, perhaps hard to eat, I don't know. If you fasted for a long time, it's not easy just to start eating food again, but he took the rice and that immediately gave him a boost of energy, and perhaps that just gave him some insight into the importance of keeping the body physically fit to support the practice, and not pushing it to an extreme where you've got no energy, no strength, no good health left, no sense of well-being left in the body. That was too far, he realized. So you can go to that spot where he received the milk rice. Perhaps he'd had an inkling, like a suspicion, oh, maybe I'm on the wrong path before that, and then thought, maybe if I try eating again, see what happens. The Buddha is still investigating the truth, practicing Dhamma vichaya. He's got good mindfulness, but he doesn't have the experience in the practice. So he practices Dhamma vichaya, investigating the truth. If I eat, get some food back, what will happen to the body, to the mind? How will it affect me? And he saw that it gave him energy again. Maybe that gave him a boost, and so he felt confident to even make his adhitthana, his determination, they say, on the banks of the Narangala River. And he placed the gold bowl on the river having eaten his food, and he said, well, if I'm able to go against this great stream of desire, the stream of craving that causes suffering for every human being, if I have what it takes to go against that and abandon it, may this bowl float upstream in the same way, go against the stream of the current of the river. And legend has it, it did. And you can go to that spot and see, there's a very sandy river in the dry season, there's not that much water, but we believe that's the area, the spot, more or less the spot where it happened, and he did this. And it moved upstream to kind of give him that little sign. You could say a miracle, but you could just say a good sign that maybe he can do what he was aiming for, which is to go against the stream of ignorance, craving, attachment, which he'd worked out is the cause of suffering, I think, by then. He just hadn't proven it to himself. So then he walked back to the Bodhi tree, which is not that far away, and met the farmer or farmers. Some people say it was one person, some people say it was a few, who already recognized this Buddha is somebody special, or the Bodhisattva is not yet the Buddha. They recognized him as someone special. He probably already had an aura of peace, radiant mind, peaceful mind on one level. He's not yet fully enlightened. But he must have seemed very determined in his practice, peaceful, already inspiring perhaps. He's a monk, so he's very simple, and he had nothing, just had his robes and bowl, we believe. So when he went to the Bodhi tree, he felt that was a suitable place for him to practice for enlightenment. And the farmer said, "Oh, I'll make you a seat." And they cut a kind of grass, which you see growing on the banks of the river there. It's still there today, the same kind of grass, and you cut it. I think they call it kusa grass. And the word kusala, I think, comes from kusa. Kusala means wholesome dhammas. That's what we develop in our practice, wholesome dhammas. So the root of the word is related to the word for the grass that they cut and they make it into bundles. And you put 8 bundles together and you get a seat. And that's what the Buddha sat on. And he said that this symbolizes the 8 worldly winds that push the minds of humans around all the time. Gain and loss, praise and blame, status, loss of status, pleasure and pain. Every day we're being affected by those experiences. Another way of saying it is you win some, you lose some. Life is not always certain, and you don't just win all the time, sometimes you lose. That's what the Buddha symbolized, or that was the symbolization he gave to those 8 bundles of grass. And he sat on them and started to meditate. And said, I'm not going to get up until I've done the job. So a real dedication to his task, not to be put off, not to be set back, distracted by self-doubt or worry. He just said, I'm going to do it. He felt confident enough at that point to do it. He'd been practicing meditation for 6 years. He'd already left his home, his family for 6 years. So the more normal obstacles that might come up in meditation, he'd already learned to deal with them. His mind had already attained jhana. So in one sense, he's already a proficient meditator. But his insight wasn't yet perfect, hadn't yet abandoned the real seeds or roots of craving and attachment. But he felt confident that he could do it. He understood perhaps what he had to do and felt, I can do this. So he sat down under the tree. Like nowadays so many people do. You go to the Bodhi tree and many people sit down there And most people will be able to sit longer than they normally can. You see many people turn up, maybe they've been traveling already, or they're not yet an expert meditator, but they get this burst of faith. Remember the Buddha, they do their chanting, they bow, depending on their tradition. Some people do the full prostration, some people just bow, say like the way we do, just kneel down and bow. Just on the cold ground there, depending where you are around the Bodhi tree. Some parts are just earth, some are kind of old marble slabs that people sit on, cold, hard. But that doesn't matter. They get the energy and then they sit. No cushion, maybe, no nothing to support your your legs and your bottom and your back. Not like, say, in your home or in the monastery where you have all the cushions and the comforts. You just sit on the floor, cold, hard floor. But because the mind is inspired and you remember the Buddha, you can sit. An hour goes by in like no time at all. Not even quiet. Like, so many people go there, it's quite noisy, busy, depending on what's happening. If you get a time when the Tibetan or the Bhutanese monks, nuns, lay people are there having their retreat, they have a loudspeaker and they do their very loud chanting with drums and bells. But that doesn't matter, that's in the background. Or each tradition from different countries, different groups will be there. Some are just silently meditating, some are bowing, and some are walking around the Bodhi tree, circumambulating. Others are chanting Pali, some chant Sanskrit, some chant Chinese, some chant in their own language. So it's quite busy, but you just sit and meditate. Because you think of the Buddha, the mind tends to concentrate, maybe better than usual. And you perhaps try harder than usual, because there's nothing else to do. There's not many distractions at the Bodhi tree. All you can do is practice. You think of the Buddha, the Buddha, he sat at this very spot and he didn't get up until he was enlightened. And that's what he said. I'm not going to finish, I'm not going to get up until I've ended the round of birth and death, which is how one way we describe enlightenment. No more birth for me. That's what he said afterwards. There's no fuzziness or uncertainty about the way the Buddha described what Nibbana is. It's the unconditioned, meaning beyond the conditioned realm of birth and death, cause and effect, karma, birth and death and the accompanying pain and sorrow and irritations of life. It's beyond that. It doesn't have that anymore. It's gone. That's how he described what he achieved under the Bodhi tree. No more birth for me, meaning no more aging, sickness and death, no more suffering, no more pain, sorrow, lamentation, despair, whatever things you count as stress, suffering, physical suffering, mental suffering, no more of that for me, he said. So even if you haven't reached that point where you're going to experience the complete ending of suffering, but just remembering and recollecting the Buddha who did that can bring up a lot of very positive emotions and a lot of determination to practice. So most people practice very well there. They can sit longer than usual, they can walk, they can chant, and they get on with it. So you can spend a whole day there, or a whole night there. And why not? Because if the Buddha spent all day, all night, and then he spent 7 weeks there, then if you go there, spend a few hours or a day there, it's not a big thing when you remember the Buddha. You can see various spots where the Buddha meditated looking at the Bodhi tree. He's under the Bodhi tree to get enlightened, but then he moved later, sat watching the Bodhi tree with, they say, with gratitude. You know, sometimes people ask, well, what happens after enlightenment? What's left? Well, you don't have to practice or develop the Noble Eightfold Path or develop insight into the Four Noble Truths anymore, because you've done that. But what's left tends to be gratitude, isn't it? Gratitude to all the people who have helped you to get to that point, because especially if you're a monk or a nun, you've been fed and clothed and helped by people. But anyone in this world is helped by people. You know, lay people, you're still helped by parents and family and friends and colleagues. So you have gratitude for all the people that help you, gratitude for, obviously, for teachers. So even the Buddha had gratitude for his teachers, even though they hadn't brought him to enlightenment, but they had helped him along the way. They still helped him, taught him jhana, taught him to meditate, taught him how to be a monk, at least up to one level. Obviously gratitude to his family, and even gratitude to the Bodhi tree itself. So he spent 7 days just looking at the Bodhi tree with gratitude. And most people in the world never sit and watch a tree and say, oh, thank you, tree, for giving me shade, protection, being there. The Buddha spent 7 days just looking at a tree, the Bodhi tree. And it must be one of the most famous trees in the world, because that's where he was enlightened, and because he said this is a very important tree. So Buddhists love to plant Bodhi trees elsewhere. You know, we try to plant them here in the cold mountains. People plant them all over the world because they remind us of the Buddha and what he did. So going to India is, you know, opportunity to learn many things, to both see the society, the location, the geography, the society that produced the Buddha. Even though it's changed it a lot, there's some things that probably haven't changed that much. See the Bodhi tree, and then also to see other people practicing. Because when you see other people practicing, maybe it gives you inspiration to practice. You can see the big Mahabodhi Chedi there. Somebody showed us one of those old pictures from the Victorian times when the British Army were there, and they started taking pictures around India, and they took a picture of the Bodhi Chedi when they first discovered it or rediscovered it. It had actually been there for hundreds of years, but it had been neglected and the top had fallen off. So they showed us that picture, and then pictures of the renovations. And then about, can't remember, maybe 20, 30 years ago, the King of Thailand sponsored reconstruction of the top of the Chedi in gold plate, gold leafed bronze and gold plate. It was redone. Cost a lot of money. I think they built it in Thailand and then shipped it over, got permission from the Indian government, and then had a big ceremony to place it on top of the Chedi. And it's still there now, so it looks very nice now. Like so many places, they've got the modern light show at night, so you see all the different lights and spotlights and colours, and got loudspeakers for when there's an event. But on the deeper level, it's, you know, the qualities in people's hearts that you notice also. The devotion, the faith, the effort they put into their practice, states of mind that people attain. Some people attain samadhi that they've never had before, or deeper or more peaceful. Some people just sit there with tears of joy, rapture coming down their cheeks, rolling down their cheeks. Some people are just very calm and just keep meditating, sitting, walking. everyone might have a different experience, but you can see the potential for those good qualities coming up in people's hearts because of the place, and not so much because of the architecture or the sort of the way it's been designed, because it's still based on maybe the way it was designed hundreds of years ago, but more just on the place and what it means spiritually in your heart, a place where the Buddha practiced and became fully awakened. So it's a bit like a magnet. It draws people from all over the world every day of every year. Thousands of people go there. So that was one part of my trip recently, but it brings up many useful reflections on the Buddha, the life of the Buddha, practicing the Buddha's teachings, whether you're in India or in Warburton or in any other part of the world, the teachings remain the same. Your opportunity to practice remains the same, because really the place of practice is not a country or a place, it's you. Your body, your mind. The Dhamma, the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha said, lie within this fathom-long body. Fathom, I think, is 6 foot. Maybe you're only 5 foot or you're 7 foot, but it doesn't matter. The idea is this body and mind. If you realize that, you realize everything you need for practicing what the Buddha taught, to realize the Four Noble Truths, to develop the path, sila, samadhi, panya, insight, to see suffering as the cause, as to see its cause, craving, but then to start abandoning the cause. You see that's the way out. That's all, you can see all that and develop that understanding, that awareness within your own mind and body. You don't actually have to travel anywhere. We believe Ajahn Chah was enlightened, but he never went to India. So enlightenment is not bound up with India or Thailand or Australia or anywhere else. It's something that comes about through causes. So the causes are the Noble Eightfold Path, which is to be developed. The result is Nibbana, which is something you realize. So maybe I've said enough for tonight. I might talk a bit more about that trip later, but for today I'll just say this much.